I'm Courtney Reed, 26, and just last month my attempt to keep the peace with my family blew up in my face. Growing up, I was the kid who tried to hold it all together, patching up arguments, swallowing my own hurt, hoping for a scrap of approval. But at our annual family dinner, that fragile peace I'd spent years trying to maintain shattered. The dining room at my parents' house, with its polished oak table and the same floral centerpiece from my childhood, was where it all went down. Olivia, my older sister, sat across from me, her smirk sharp enough to cut glass. She demanded I apologize for something I didn't even do, some fabricated slight from years ago she'd twisted into a weapon. When I pushed back, refusing to grovel, the room went dead silent. My mother's fork clinked against her plate. My father stared at his wine glass like it held the secrets of the universe. "You're tearing this family apart," Olivia spat, her voice dripping with venom, while my cousins and aunts shifted uncomfortably in their seats. But here's the thing. Her words didn't break me. They lit a fire. I wasn't just going to push back. I was done playing their game. I'd been collecting evidence of Olivia's cruelty and my parents' indifference for years, and that night, I decided it was time to use it. I'm not just fighting for me. I'm about to flip their world upside down and show them what justice feels. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, hit subscribe, and stay with me for the most satisfying revenge you'll ever hear, because you won't believe what I do once I set my plan in motion. The air in that dining room felt heavy, like the moment before a storm breaks. I sat there, my hands folded tightly in my lap, nails digging into my palms as I tried to keep my face neutral. Olivia leaned forward, her eyes glinting with that familiar mix of malice and triumph. She'd always known how to twist the knife ever since we were kids. "Courtney, you owe me an apology," she said, her voice loud enough to carry to every corner of the table. "You've always been so selfish, stirring up drama." My stomach churned, but I didn't flinch. I'd heard this script before, her rewriting history to paint me as the problem. My mother, sitting at the head of the table, didn't look up from her plate. My father, to her right, sipped his wine, his silence louder than any words. The rest of the family, cousins, aunts, uncles, kept their eyes down like they were watching a car crash they didn't want to get involved in. I could feel the weight of their judgment, like the unspoken agreement that I was the one who didn't fit. I took a slow breath, my heart pounding but my voice steady. "I'm not apologizing, Olivia, not this time." The words felt like a rebellion, small but seismic. Her face froze, her lips parting slightly as if she couldn't believe I'd dared to speak back. For a second I thought she might laugh it off, like she always did, turning my defiance into a joke. But then her eyes narrowed and she leaned closer, her voice dropping to a hiss. "You'll regret that." The threat hung there, sharp and familiar. It wasn't the first time she'd promised to make me pay, but it was the first time I felt something shift inside me, a spark of certainty. I wasn't the scared kid anymore, the one who'd shrink under her glare. I'd spent years quietly documenting every cruel word, every burn, every dismissal. I had proof, and I was ready to use it. Growing up, I was the odd one out in the Reed family. My parents, Margaret and David, were obsessed with appearances. Perfect house, perfect kids, perfect life. Olivia was their golden child, straight-A student, prom queen, the daughter who could do no wrong. I was the quiet one, the dreamer, always scribbling stories in my notebook, or sneaking off to the library to escape. I didn't fit their mold, and they never let me forget it. When I was 12, Olivia burned my arm with a curling iron. Not an accident, but a deliberate act after I'd dared to borrow her sweater. The pain was searing, a red welt blooming on my skin. But when I ran crying to my mother, she barely looked up from her magazine. "You shouldn't have provoked her," she said, her voice flat. My father didn't even bother to come downstairs. That moment stuck with me, a wound deeper than the burn itself. It wasn't just the pain, it was the way they dismissed it, like my hurt didn't matter. Over the years, the incidents piled up. Olivia's taunts, her accidental shoves, her knack for making me feel small in front of everyone. My parents' indifference grew colder with each passing year, their sighs heavier whenever I tried to speak up. I learned to keep my head down, to swallow my anger, to pretend it didn't hurt. But I wasn't just enduring, I was watching. I started keeping a journal when I was 14, noting every cruel thing Olivia did. Every time my mother blamed me, every time my father looked through me. By the time I was 18, I had a box hidden under my bed. Photographs of bruises, screenshots of texts, even a recording of Olivia laughing about the curling iron incident at a family party. I didn't know what I'd do with it all, but it felt like power. Like a secret weapon I was building piece by piece. That night at the dinner, as Olivia's words echoed in the silent room, I felt that power stirring. I looked at her, at the smug curve of her lips, and then at my mother, who still wouldn't meet my eyes. My father's hand tightened around his glass, but he said nothing. The rest of the family waited, their discomfort palpable, like they were holding their breath for the next blow. I could have backed down, like I always had. I could have apologized, smoothed things over, kept the peace, but something in me snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, like a lock clicking into place. I wasn't going to let them write me out of my own story anymore. I had evidence, years of it, and I knew exactly how to use it. This wasn't just about surviving their cruelty, it was about making them face it. I pushed my chair back, the scrape against the floor louder than it should have been, and stood. "I'm done here," I said, my voice calm but firm. Olivia's smirk faltered, just for a second. And as I walked out of that dining room, I knew I was walking toward something bigger. Toward justice, toward freedom, toward a reckoning they'd never see coming. The walk from the dining room to my car felt like a lifetime, each step heavy with the weight of memories I'd tried so hard to bury. The cool night air hit my face as I closed the front door behind me, but it didn't calm the storm in my chest. Olivia's words, "You'll regret that," echoed in my head, dragging me back to a childhood where I was always the one left out, the one whose light was dimmed to make hers shine brighter. As I slid into the driver's seat, my hands trembling on the steering wheel, I couldn't stop the flood of moments that shaped me into the invisible girl I'd become. It was time to face those memories head-on, to remember why I'd started collecting evidence in the first place. Not just to survive, but to fight back. When I was 8, I won a short story contest at school. I'd spent weeks hunched over my notebook, crafting a tale about a girl who could talk to the stars. The teacher called my parents to the award ceremony, her voice bubbling with pride over the phone. I stood on that stage, clutching my certificate, my heart pounding with hope that maybe this time they'd see me. But when I got home, my mother glanced at the certificate, muttered, "That's nice, Courtney," and set it aside to gush over Olivia's latest debate team trophy. My father didn't even look up from his newspaper. The certificate ended up in a drawer, forgotten, while Olivia's trophy got pride of place on the mantel. That was the pattern. My small victories, art projects, spelling bees, even a poem published in the local paper, were always overshadowed by Olivia's louder, shinier successes. By the time I was 10, I'd learned to stop showing them my work. I'd hide my sketchbooks under my mattress, write my stories in secret. But Olivia always found a way to make me feel small. Once, she borrowed one of my drawings, only to present it as her own at a school art fair. When I confronted her, tears stinging my eyes, she laughed, twirling her hair around her finger. "It's not like anyone would believe it was yours," she said, her voice sweet but cutting. My parents didn't care when I told them. My mother sighed, adjusting her earrings. "Don't make a fuss, Courtney. It's just a drawing." My father grunted something about not stirring up trouble. I went to my room and cried, not because of the drawing, but because they didn't care enough to listen. The curling iron incident at 12 was the worst. Olivia and I were in her room, getting ready for a family party. I'd borrowed her sweater without asking. Stupid, I know, but I just wanted to feel pretty for once. She caught me, her face twisting with rage. Before I could react, she grabbed the curling iron from her vanity, still hot from her perfect curls, and pressed it against my forearm. The pain was instant, a white-hot scream that made my knees buckle. I yanked my arm back, gasping, the smell of burnt skin lingering in the air. Olivia didn't flinch. "That's what you get," she said, her voice calm, like she'd just swatted a fly. I ran to my mother, my arm throbbing, the red welt already blistering. "You shouldn't have taken her things," she said, barely glancing at the burn. "Go put some ice on it." My father was in the garage, tinkering with his car, and didn't even come inside when I called for him. That night I sat on my bed, pressing a cold washcloth to my arm, and made a promise to myself. I'd never let them dismiss me again. From then on, I watched them closely. Every time Olivia mocked me in front of cousins, every time my mother brushed off my pain with a wave of her hand, every time my father's silence confirmed I didn't matter, I wrote it down. I kept a small notebook hidden in my sock drawer, filling it with dates, times, and details. March 15th, age 14. Olivia tripped me at the family picnic, laughed when I fell. Mom said I should be more careful. June 3rd, age 16. Dad ignored my straight A report card but framed Olivia's B+1. The entries grew page after page, a map of my invisibility. I started taking photos too. Bruises from accidental shoves, Olivia's smirking texts telling me I'd never measure up. By high school I had a system. A locked box under my bed, stuffed with evidence of their cruelty. It wasn't just about remembering, it was about building something they couldn't ignore. Sitting in my car now, the engine idling, I thought about that box. It was still there, in my apartment, heavier now with years of proof. The dinner had been the final straw. Olivia's smug demand for an apology, my mother's refusal to meet my eyes, my father's silent complicity. It was all too familiar. But I wasn't that scared 12-year-old anymore, clutching a washcloth to a burn. I was 26, with a plan and a purpose. My hands steadied on the wheel as I pulled out of the driveway, the streetlights casting shadows across my dashboard. I didn't know exactly how I'd use that evidence yet, but I knew it was time. Olivia and my mother had spent years rewriting my story to make me the villain. Now, I was going to tell the truth, and make sure everyone heard it. As I drove into the night, the spark from the dining room grew into a flame. They thought they could break me, but they'd just given me the match. The streetlights blurred as I drove away from my parents' house, the sting of Olivia's words still fresh, but my mind was already racing toward the box under my bed. That locked metal box, dented from years of being shoved into corners, held more than just memories. It held power. It was the moment I realized I could fight back, not with screams or tears, but with something sharper: evidence. Years of collecting it had started as a way to cope, a way to make sense of the pain, but now it was my weapon. Sitting in my apartment that night, the box open on my lap, I relived the day I decided to stop being their victim and start building my revenge. It was the summer I turned 16, a sweltering July afternoon when everything changed. I was in my room, the fan humming uselessly against the heat, when Olivia barged in. She'd just gotten accepted into some prestigious summer program, and my parents had thrown her a celebratory dinner the night before, complete with a cake I wasn't invited to share. I was sitting on my bed, scribbling in my notebook, when she tossed a crumpled flyer at me. "You should try this," she said, her voice dripping with mockery. It was for a local writing contest, one I'd secretly been eyeing for weeks. "Oh, wait," she added, smirking. "You'd probably just embarrass yourself." She left, her laughter echoing down the hall. I smoothed out the flyer, my fingers trembling, not with fear but with something new. Anger, yes, but also clarity. I was done letting her define me. That night I didn't sleep. I sat at my desk, the glow of my laptop casting shadows on the wall, and poured everything into that contest entry. Every word was a rebellion, every sentence a piece of myself I refused to let them erase. I wrote about a girl who carried her pain like a secret, turning it into strength no one saw coming. When I submitted it, my heart pounded, not just with hope, but with defiance. Weeks later, the email came. I'd won first place. The prize was $500 and a chance to read my story at a community event. For the first time, I felt seen, not by my family but by strangers who clapped and smiled as I read. I didn't tell my parents or Olivia. I didn't want their dismissal to taint it. Instead, I took the prize money and bought a small digital recorder, the kind that could capture conversations without anyone noticing. That was the day my secret project began. I started small, testing the recorder at a family barbecue. Olivia was in rare form, teasing me about my nerdy hobbies in front of our cousins. I stood there, smiling tightly, while the recorder in my pocket caught every word. Later I listened to her voice, sharp, cruel, laughing as she called me the family charity case. It hurt, but it also fueled me. I began carrying the recorder everywhere, hiding it in my bag during dinners, slipping it under my sleeve at holiday gatherings. I captured Olivia's taunts, my mother's cold rebukes, my father's silence. I added photos, too, snapping pictures of the marks Olivia left when she accidentally pushed me into a doorframe, or the way my mother's lips pursed when I tried to share good news. I saved texts like the one Olivia sent after I got into college, "Bet you'll flunk out by Christmas." Each piece was a brick in the wall I was building, a wall they'd never see until it was too late. By the time I was 20, the box was nearly full. I'd moved out for college, renting a tiny apartment with money from part-time jobs. My parents didn't help. They said I'd chosen a useless major in creative writing, unlike Olivia's practical business degree. But I wasn't just writing stories anymore, I was writing my truth. I upgraded my system, a cloud drive for digital files encrypted to keep them safe. I organized everything: dates, times, incidents, even witnesses who'd seen Olivia's cruelty but never spoke up. The curling iron incident was there, too, documented with a photo of the scar on my forearm, and a recording of Olivia joking about it at a family party. Her voice slurred with wine as she laughed. She deserved it. I didn't know how I'd use it all, but holding that box felt like holding a grenade. Sitting in my apartment now, the box open on my lap, I ran my fingers over the notebook's worn cover. The pages were filled with my handwriting, neat at first, then frantic as the years went on. I pulled out the recorder, its battery long dead, and plugged it into my laptop. Olivia's voice filled the room, a clip from 2 years ago. "Courtney's always been such a drama queen, right, Mom?" My mother's response was a soft hum of agreement. I closed my eyes, letting the hurt wash over me, but it didn't drown me anymore. It sharpened my focus. I opened my laptop and started a new document, titling it, "The Plan." I wasn't just going to expose them, I was going to destroy the perfect image they'd built. Olivia's rising career in marketing, my mother's reputation as a pillar of the community, they'd built it all on lies, and I had the truth. As I typed, my phone buzzed on the table. A text from my cousin Emma, who'd been at the dinner. "You okay? That was intense." I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Emma had seen it all: Olivia's venom, my parents' indifference, but she'd never spoken up before. I typed back, "I'm fine, you'll see." I didn't need her pity. I needed her to witness what came next. The dinner had been the final push, the moment I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I saved the document, closed the box, and slid it back under my bed. Tomorrow, I'd start putting the pieces together. Every text, every recording, every photo. They thought they could erase me, but I was about to make sure the world saw them for who they really were. The weight of the box lingered in my mind as I woke the next morning, my apartment quiet except for the hum of the coffee maker. Last night's decision to finally act on my plan felt like a current running through me, electric and unyielding. Today was the eve of the annual family dinner, the one I'd been dreading for weeks, and I knew it would be the stage for my reckoning. As I sat at my kitchen table, my laptop open and a half-empty mug in my hand, I began mapping out how I'd expose Olivia and my mother. Every click of the keyboard felt like a step toward justice, but beneath my resolve, a knot of dread tightened, because confronting them meant facing the family I'd spent years trying to please. I opened the encrypted folder on my laptop, the one I'd named Truth. It held everything: the recordings, the photos, the journal entries, even a timeline I'd built to connect the dots of their cruelty. I scrolled through it now, pausing on a photo from when I was 15, a faint bruise on my wrist from Olivia's playful shove during a family picnic. The memory stung, but it also grounded me. I wasn't just angry, I was prepared. Tonight's dinner wasn't just another obligation, it was the moment I'd been building toward for a decade. I'd spent years collecting evidence in secret, but now I needed a strategy to make it hit hard. I started drafting an email, one I could send to key people: cousins, aunts, even Olivia's boss if I needed to. The subject line read, "The truth about Olivia Reed." My fingers hesitated over the keys, not from doubt, but from the weight of what I was about to do. I leaned back in my chair, my eyes drifting to the window where the morning light filtered through. The family dinner was always held at my parents' house, a sprawling suburban home that screamed perfection. Manicured lawn, gleaming windows, a facade as polished as their lies. Every year, it was the same. Relatives packed around the dining table, my mother playing the gracious host, Olivia basking in the spotlight, and me, shrinking into the background. This time, though, I wouldn't fade. I'd bring the evidence with me, loaded onto a USB drive in my pocket. I imagined the moment, Olivia's smug smile faltering, my mother's composed mask cracking as I played the recordings for everyone to hear. My heart raced at the thought, a mix of fear and exhilaration. Could I really do this? Pull the pin on the grenade I'd been carrying for so long? To steady myself, I stood and paced the small living room, my bare feet cold against the hardwood floor. I caught my reflection in the mirror above the couch. Dark circles under my eyes, my jaw set tight. I looked like someone who'd been fighting a war no one else could see. I thought about the curling iron scar on my forearm, still faintly visible, a reminder of why I couldn't back down. Olivia had burned me, and my parents had let her. They'd dismissed every cry for help, every plea for fairness. Now, I'd make them face it all. I sat back down and added to the email draft, attaching a sample file, a recording from last Christmas, where Olivia mocked my freelance writing career while my mother laughed. Courtney thinks she's some big-shot writer, Olivia had said, her voice sharp with disdain. She'll be back here begging for a job soon. My mother's chuckle had cut deeper than the words. That file would be my opening shot. As I worked, my phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from my mother. Dinner at 6. Don't be late. No warmth, no looking forward to seeing you. Just a command, like I was an employee rather than a daughter. I stared at the screen, my thumb brushing the edge of the phone. For a moment I imagined texting back telling her I wasn't coming. But no, that would be letting them win. I needed to be there, to look them in the eyes when I laid their secrets bare. I typed a quick, "I'll be there," and hit send, my stomach twisting. I wasn't just preparing for a dinner, I was preparing for a confrontation that would change everything. I spent the afternoon organizing my evidence, double-checking every file. I printed a few key photos, ones that showed the worst of Olivia's actions, like the bruise from the picnic, and a screenshot of a text where she'd called me pathetic for crying after the curling iron incident. I tucked them into a folder, alongside the USB drive. My hands shook as I sealed the envelope, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of what I was about to unleash. I thought about the guests who'd be there, my cousins, who'd always stayed neutral, my aunt, who'd once whispered that I should stand up for myself, even my uncle who'd seen Olivia's cruelty but never intervened. Would they believe me? Or would they cling to the perfect image of Olivia and my mother, the one they'd all bought into for years? By late afternoon I was dressed for the dinner, black jeans, a simple blouse, nothing flashy. I didn't want to draw attention until I was ready. I slipped the USB drive into my pocket, its weight a small anchor against the nerves bubbling in my chest. As I locked my apartment door and headed to my car, I replayed my plan. Wait for the right moment. Maybe when Olivia started her usual taunts, then play the recordings. I'd start with the Christmas one, let her voice fill the room, then show the photos. I'd keep my voice calm, my words clear. I wanted them to see her for what she was, a bully who'd built her life on tearing me down. And my mother? Her silence, her complicity, would be just as exposed. As I drove toward my parents' house, the sky was turning a deep orange, the kind of sunset that felt like a warning. My hands gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I wasn't just walking into a dinner, I was walking into a battlefield. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I had the truth, and tonight I'd make sure they couldn't ignore it anymore. The gravel crunched under my tires as I pulled into my parents' driveway, the familiar sight of their pristine house looming like a stage set for tonight's drama. The USB drive in my pocket felt heavier than it should, a small but potent reminder of the evidence I carried. I stepped out of the car, smoothing my blouse, my heart thudding but my face composed. Inside, the family dinner was already underway. Laughter and clinking glasses spilled through the open windows, a facade of warmth that made my skin prickle. As I walked up the steps and pushed open the front door, I braced myself for the onslaught I knew was coming. Olivia's voice cut through the chatter before I even reached the dining room, and I knew this night would test every ounce of my resolve. The dining room was a tableau of forced festivity. The long oak table gleamed under the chandelier, laden with platters of roast chicken and bowls of mashed potatoes. My mother stood at the head, her smile as polished as her pearl necklace, greeting relatives with air kisses. My father sat at the opposite end, nursing a glass of bourbon, his eyes distant as always. Olivia held court near the center, her laugh sharp and performative, her blonde hair catching the light as she tossed her head. My cousins, aunts and uncles filled the seats, their faces a mix of polite smiles and guarded glances. I slipped into the room, taking the empty chair near my cousin Emma, who gave me a small, nervous nod. The air felt thick, like everyone knew something was about to shift but couldn't name it. "Courtney, you're late," my mother said, her voice clipped as she passed a bowl of green beans. No warmth, just a statement. Like I was a guest who'd overstayed her welcome before even arriving. I forced a smile, my fingers brushing the USB drive in my pocket. "Traffic," I said simply, keeping my tone neutral. Olivia's eyes locked onto me from across the table, her lips curling into that familiar smirk. "Always an excuse with you," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. A few relatives chuckled, the sound grating against my nerves. I clenched my fork, the metal cool against my palm, and took a slow breath. This was just the beginning. The conversation swirled around me, cousins talking about their kids, my uncle droning on about his golf game. But Olivia kept circling back to me, her comments sharp and deliberate. "So Courtney, still scribbling your little stories?" she asked, her tone dripping with condescension as she speared a piece of chicken. "Must be nice to have so much free time." My aunt laughed, a nervous titter, while my mother's lips twitched in approval. I felt the heat rising in my cheeks, but I didn't bite. Not yet. "I keep busy," I said, my voice steady, though my nails dug into my thigh under the table. Olivia leaned forward, her eyes glinting. "Busy? Oh right, your freelance thing. How's that working out? Still living in that shoebox apartment?" More laughter, louder this time, like she'd scored a point in a game I hadn't agreed to play. I glanced around the table, searching for an ally. Emma looked down at her plate, her fork paused midair. My uncle shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. My father took another sip of bourbon, his silence as heavy as ever. My mother, though, met my eyes for a fleeting second, and I saw it. The same cold dismissal I'd known since I was a kid. It was the look she'd given me after the curling iron when I'd begged for her to care. The memory burned, and with it, my resolve hardened. I wasn't here to win their approval anymore. I was here to end this. Olivia wasn't done. She leaned back in her chair, twirling her wine glass, her voice taking on a mock sympathetic tone. "You know, Courtney, it's okay to admit you're struggling. We all know you've had a tough time keeping up." The table went quiet. The kind of silence that presses against your eardrums. My heart pounded, but I kept my face calm, my hands steady as I set down my fork. "I'm doing just fine, Olivia," I said, my voice low but clear. She raised an eyebrow, sensing a challenge. "Oh, really? Because last I checked, you're still the family disappointment." The word landed like a slap, and I saw my mother's lips purse, not in defense of me, but in agreement. I could have lashed out. I could have thrown the USB drive on the table right then, let the recordings play and watch her face collapse. But I didn't. Timing was everything, and I needed the moment to be perfect. I leaned back, mirroring her posture, and gave her a small smile. "You'd be surprised what I've been up to," I said, my tone light but laced with something she couldn't quite place. Her smirk faltered just for a second, and I felt a spark of satisfaction. She didn't know it yet, but I was already rewriting the script of this dinner. Every barb she threw, every laugh she drew, was fuel for what was coming. The meal dragged on, each comment from Olivia sharper than the last. She brought up the time I ruined her high school graduation party by overreacting to her spilling wine on my dress, conveniently leaving out that she'd done it on purpose. My mother nodded along, adding, "You've always been so sensitive, Courtney." My father grunted, his eyes on his plate. The rest of the family followed their lead, their silence complicit. But I didn't shrink. I sat taller, my hand resting on the USB drive, my mind racing through the files I'd prepared. The Christmas recording, the photos, the texts, they were all there, waiting. I just needed the right moment to strike, when their cruelty was at its peak, when they thought they'd won. As Olivia launched into another story about my failures, I felt the knot in my chest loosen. They thought they could bury me in their contempt, but they were about to learn how wrong they were. The dining room seemed to close in, as Olivia's latest jab hung in the air. Her story about my failed attempt to steal her spotlight at her graduation party, drawing murmurs of agreement from the table. My fork rested on my plate, untouched for the last 10 minutes, as I felt the USB drive burning a hole in my pocket. The laughter, the sideways glances, the way my mother's eyes slid past me, it was all building to something unbearable. Then, my mother set down her wine glass with a deliberate clink, her face a mask of cold authority, and I knew the moment I'd been waiting for was here. They were about to push me out for good, and I was ready to turn their verdict into my opening. "Courtney," my mother said, her voice cutting through the chatter like a knife. Everyone fell silent, forks pausing, eyes darting between us. "We need to talk about your place in this family." My heart thudded, but I kept my gaze steady, my hands folded in my lap to hide the slight tremble. She leaned forward, her manicured nails tapping the table. "You've caused nothing but tension for years, always arguing, always making things difficult." Her words were measured, rehearsed, like she'd been waiting to deliver this speech. Olivia smirked, leaning back in her chair, her arms crossed as if she'd already won. My father stared at his plate, his jaw tight, offering nothing. The rest of the family, cousins, aunts, uncles, shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. I opened my mouth to respond, but my mother raised a hand, silencing me. "No, let me finish," she said, her tone sharp. "We've tried to be patient, but it's clear you don't belong here. You're not like us. You never have been." The words hit like a punch, stealing my breath. My cousin Emma glanced at me, her eyes wide with shock, but she didn't say a word. My uncle coughed, looking away. Olivia's smirk widened, her eyes glinting with triumph. "What Mom's trying to say," she interjected, her voice syrupy sweet, "is that maybe it's time you stop dragging us down with you. You're not a reed, not really." The room was so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the chandelier above us. My mother nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. "We've decided it's best if you don't come to these dinners anymore," she said. "You're on your own now, Courtney. It's what you've always wanted, isn't it? To be different?" The word dripped with disdain, and I felt the weight of every eye on me, waiting for me to crumble. My father finally looked up, his face unreadable, but he didn't contradict her. The rejection was final, public, a declaration that I was no longer part of their perfect family. My chest tightened, the old hurt rising like bile, but beneath it something else burned, anger, sharp and clear, and a certainty that this was my moment. I pushed my chair back, the scrape against the floor loud in the silence. "You're right," I said, my voice calm but carrying a weight that made Olivia's smirk falter. "I've never been like you, and I'm done pretending I want to be." My mother's eyes narrowed, a flicker of unease crossing her face. I reached into my pocket, my fingers closing around the USB drive. "But before I go, there's something you all need to hear." I pulled out my phone, connected it to the small portable speaker I'd slipped into my bag earlier, and opened the file I'd prepared. My hands were steady now, the tremble gone. I pressed play, and Olivia's voice filled the room. Her words from last Christmas, cruel and unmistakable. "Courtney thinks she's some big-shot writer. She'll be back here begging for a job soon." My mother's laugh followed, a soft, complicit chuckle that echoed in the stunned silence. The table froze. My cousin Emma's fork clattered onto her plate. My aunt's mouth fell open, her hand clutching her napkin. Olivia's face drained of color, her eyes wide as she realized what was happening. I didn't stop there. I opened the folder I'd brought, pulling out the photo of the curling iron burn on my arm, the scar stark under the dining room lights. "This was when I was 12, I said, holding it up for everyone to see. "Olivia did this, not an accident. And Mom, you told me I deserved it." I slid the photo across the table toward my mother, who stared at it, her face pale. I played another clip, this one from 2 years ago. Olivia's voice slurred with wine, laughing as she said, "She deserved it, that burn. Should have done it again." Gasps rippled around the table. My uncle's jaw tightened, and Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Courtney, stop this," my mother snapped, her voice shaking. "You're making a scene." But I wasn't done. I held up a screenshot of a text from Olivia sent after I'd gotten into college. "Bet you'll flunk out by Christmas." I looked straight at her. "You were wrong about that too," I said. "I graduated with honors. Not that any of you cared." The room was a pressure cooker now, the air thick with shock and discomfort. Olivia's hands gripped the table, her knuckles white. "You're lying," she hissed, but her voice lacked conviction. My father finally spoke, his voice low. Courtney, this is enough. But I shook my head. No, Dad, it's not. You've all spent years pretending I'm the problem, but this? I gestured to the phone, the photo, the folder. This is the truth. I stood, my chair pushed back, my heart pounding, but my voice steady. You can disown me, I said, looking from my mother to Olivia to my father. But you don't get to rewrite my story anymore. I gathered my things, leaving the photo on the table, the speaker still looping Olivia's cruel words. As I walked toward the door, I heard Emma whisper, Courtney, wait, but I didn't stop. The weight of their verdict was supposed to crush me, but instead it set me free. I'd shown them the truth, and there was no going back. The air outside my parents' house was sharp, the night swallowing the echo of Olivia's recorded voice as I stepped onto the porch. My heart still raced from the confrontation. The stunned faces of my family burned into my mind. Olivia's pallor, my mother's trembling hands, the way my father's eyes finally met mine, not with anger but with something like fear. I dropped the bomb and the fallout was just beginning. As I reached my car, my phone buzzed in my hand, the screen lighting up with a notification that changed everything. It was an email from my freelance client, a major online platform, confirming they'd published my exposé, a detailed public account of Olivia's abuse and my mother's complicity, backed by the evidence I'd just revealed. The timing was perfect, almost too perfect, and I knew this was the moment my revenge would ripple beyond that dining room. I leaned against my car, the cool metal grounding me as I opened the email. Courtney, your piece is live, it read. It's already gaining traction, thousands of views in the first hour. My breath caught. I'd spent weeks crafting the article, weaving my journal entries, recordings, and photos into a narrative that laid bare the truth about my family. I'd sent it to the platform days ago, timing its release to coincide with the dinner, but I hadn't expected it to hit this hard, this fast. I opened the link, my hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. The headline stared back, The Cost of Silence, a Story of Abuse and Redemption. Below it, my name, Courtney Reed, in bold. I scrolled through, seeing my words, raw, honest, undeniable, paired with the evidence, the curling iron photo, screenshots of Olivia's texts, even a transcript of the Christmas recording. It was all there, public, permanent. I glanced back at the house, the windows glowing with the warm light of a dinner now in chaos. They hadn't seen the article yet, but they would soon. I imagined Olivia's phone lighting up with notifications, her colleagues and friends reading the truth about her. My mother, the community darling, would face whispers at her charity events, her reputation unraveling. The thought sent a shiver of satisfaction through me. But it wasn't just about their pain. It was about reclaiming my voice. I'd spent years being silenced, my hurt dismissed as drama. Now the world would hear me, and they couldn't look away. My phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Emma. Courtney, what was that? Everyone's freaking out. I could picture her, still at the table, her wide eyes darting between Olivia's frozen shock and my mother's attempt to regain control. I didn't reply, not yet. Instead, I opened the article's comments section, already flooded with responses. This is heartbreaking. You're so strong, one read. I've been through something similar. Thank you for speaking out, said another. My chest tightened, not with pain, but with something new, validation. Strangers believed me. Strangers saw me. It was more than I'd ever gotten from my family. I slid into my car, the engine humming to life as I pulled out of the driveway. My phone kept buzzing, more comments, a few messages from old classmates who'd seen the article. One was from a high school friend, Sarah. Just read your piece. I always knew Olivia was awful. Proud of you. I smiled, a small private thing, and kept driving. The article wasn't just a weapon. It was a bridge to people who understood, who'd lived through their own versions of my story. I thought about the dinner, how I'd left the photo and the speaker behind, letting Olivia's own words haunt the room. But the article was bigger. It was my voice, amplified, reaching beyond the walls of that house. As I drove, I pictured what was happening inside. Olivia, scrambling to explain the recordings, her charm useless against the truth. My mother, trying to smooth things over with her polished excuses, only to find no one was listening. My father, silent as always, but maybe, just maybe, realizing he'd failed me. The article would hit their circles soon, Olivia's co-workers, my mother's charity board, the extended family who'd always stayed neutral. I'd sent a copy to Olivia's boss earlier that day anonymously, with a note, "You should know who you're employing." I'd done the same with my mother's community group, attaching the curling iron photo. Their carefully curated lives were crumbling, and I'd lit the fuse. I stopped at a red light, my fingers tapping the steering wheel. Part of me wanted to go back to see their faces when they saw the article, to watch their world unravel in real time. But I didn't need to. The evidence was out there now. Undeniable, and I'd already walked away. My phone buzzed again, a notification from the platform. The article had gone viral, shared across social media, picking up thousands more views. I felt a surge of power, not just over them, but over my own story. I wasn't the invisible girl anymore. I was the one who'd changed the narrative. As I drove into the night, the city lights blurring past, I realized this wasn't the end. It was a beginning. The article was just the first wave. There were more platforms, more ways to share my truth, to make sure Olivia and my mother couldn't hide. I'd spent years building my case, and now I'd use it to rebuild my life. The light turned green, and I pressed the gas, my heart steady for the first time in years. They thought they could cast me out, but I'd just shown them I was never theirs to defend. The city lights streaked past my car window, their glow a stark contrast to the chaos I'd left behind at my parents' house. My phone, resting on the passenger seat, buzzed relentlessly. Notifications from the viral article, texts from cousins, even a missed call from an unknown number that I suspected was Olivia, already scrambling to do damage control. I didn't answer. The USB drive was still in my pocket, a small weight that felt like victory, and the memory of the dining room, Olivia's frozen shock, my mother's trembling composure, played on a loop in my mind. Now, as I pulled into a quiet coffee shop parking lot to catch my breath, I knew it was time to seal their fate. This wasn't just about exposing their cruelty, it was about dismantling the hypocrisy they'd built their lives on, and I was ready to walk away for good. I stepped into the coffee shop, the warm smell of espresso grounding me as I found a corner table. My laptop was in my bag, and I opened it, pulling up the article again. It had over 50,000 views now, the comments section a flood of support and shared stories. I skimmed a few. "You're an inspiration. I wish I'd had your courage," and felt a pang of something I hadn't expected. Connection. But I wasn't here to bask in the response. I had one more move to make. I opened my email, where I'd drafted another message earlier that day, this one addressed to a local journalist who'd covered community events my mother was part of. Attached were the key files: the curling iron photo, the Christmas recording, and a new one. A video from a family reunion 2 years ago, where Olivia mocked my pathetic apartment while my mother nodded along, her smile tight but complicit. I hesitated, my cursor hovering over the send button. This email would take the exposé beyond the online platform, into the local news, where my mother's reputation as a charity board member would take a direct hit. Olivia's marketing job, already shaky after I'd sent the evidence to her boss, would likely collapse under the public scrutiny. I thought about their faces at the dinner, Olivia's smug certainty, my mother's cold dismissal, and my hesitation vanished. I hit send, the whoosh of the email a small, satisfying sound. Then I leaned back, sipping my coffee, and let myself imagine their world unravel. Back at the house, I knew the scene was still unfolding. After I'd played the recordings and left the photo on the table, the room had erupted into whispers. Emma had texted me again on my way to the coffee shop. "Olivia's trying to say it's all a misunderstanding. Mom's furious." I could picture my mother, her voice sharp as she tried to regain control, insisting it was family business and I was overreacting. Olivia would be spinning her own story, maybe claiming I'd doctored the evidence, her charm working overtime to salvage her image. But the article was live, the evidence undeniable, and the truth was spreading faster than they could contain it. My father, I imagined, was still silent, his bourbon glass empty, his failure to intervene laid bare for everyone to see. I opened my phone and checked the platform again. A new comment caught my eye. "I worked with Olivia, she's always been a bully, thank you for this." It was from someone anonymous, but it hit like a spark. Others were starting to speak out, corroborating my story with their own experiences. I hadn't expected that. People stepping out of the shadows, emboldened by my truth. I thought about the dinner, how I'd stood there, my voice steady as I said, "You don't get to rewrite my story anymore." It wasn't just for them, it was for me, for the girl who'd hidden her pain for years, who'd carried that box of evidence like a lifeline. I'd walked out of that house not as their outcast, but as someone who'd reclaimed her power. My laptop pinged with a new email, a response from the journalist. "This is explosive," she wrote. "Can we meet tomorrow? I want to run this story." My heart skipped, not with fear, but with certainty. I typed a quick reply agreeing to meet and closed my laptop. The coffee shop was quiet now, the barista wiping down the counter, the hum of the espresso machine a soft backdrop. I felt lighter, like I'd shed a weight I'd carried for years. Olivia and my mother had built their lives on lies, perfect daughter, perfect mother, perfect family, and I'd just torn it all down. Not with anger, not with screams, but with the truth, cold and undeniable. As I stood to leave, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a voicemail from Olivia. I hesitated, then played it, keeping the volume low. Her voice was shaky, nothing like the confident sneer I knew. "Courtney, you need to take that article down. You're ruining everything. We can talk, okay?" I deleted it without responding. There was nothing left to say. I'd given them years to see me, to care, and they'd chosen to look away. Now they'd face the consequences. I stepped outside, the night air cool against my skin, and looked up at the stars. For the first time in years, I felt free, not just from them, but from the need to prove myself to them. I'd exposed their hypocrisy, and in doing so, I'd found my own strength. The night air was crisp as I left the coffee shop, my steps lighter than they'd been in years, the weight of the dinner and the article's release still humming through me. I drove to a small diner across town, a place I'd been meeting my friends Maya and Liam for years, a sanctuary far from the polished facade of my parents' house. The neon sign flickered as I pulled into the lot, and through the window I saw them at our usual booth, laughing over a plate of fries. After the venom of the family dinner, I needed this. People who saw me, who chose me, not because of blood, but because of who I was. As I walked inside, the bell above the door jingled, and Maya's wave pulled me into a moment of warmth that felt like coming home. I slid into the booth, the vinyl creaking under me, and Liam pushed a milkshake my way. Chocolate, my favorite, with 2 straws like we were kids again. "You look like you just fought a dragon," he said, his grin teasing but his eyes searching. Maya leaned forward, her braids swinging, her voice soft. "Emma texted me about the dinner, said you dropped a bomb and walked out. You okay?" I took a sip of the milkshake, the cold sweetness grounding me, and nodded. "Better than okay?" I said, my voice steady but quieter than I expected. I pulled out my phone and showed them the article, now at 75,000 views, the comments still pouring in. Maya's eyes widened as she scrolled, her fingers pausing over the curling iron photo. "Courtney," she whispered, "this is huge." Liam read over her shoulder, his usual smirk fading. "You really did it," he said, his voice low with something like awe. "You took them down." I leaned back, my hands wrapping around the milkshake glass, the condensation cool against my palms. "It's not just about taking them down," I said. "It's about telling the truth. They don't get to define me anymore." Maya reached across the table, her hand squeezing mine. "You've always been more than they gave you credit for," she said, her eyes fierce. "We see you." Those words hit harder than I expected, a lump rising in my throat. For years I'd craved that from my family. Validation. Acknowledgement. And here it was, simple and real, from the people who'd become my chosen family. We talked for hours, the diner's hum of conversation and clinking dishes a soft backdrop. I told them everything, the dinner, Olivia's taunts, my mother's cold verdict, the moment I played the recordings and saw their faces crack. Maya laughed when I described Olivia's shock, her hand slapping the table. "I bet she's losing it right now," she said, grinning. Liam, quieter, asked, "What about your dad? He just sat there?" I nodded, the memory of his silence sharp but no longer cutting. "He always has," I said. "But it doesn't matter anymore. I'm done waiting for him to show up." They didn't push, didn't offer empty platitudes. Instead, Maya ordered another round of fries, and Liam started telling a ridiculous story about his latest failed attempt at baking, making me laugh until my sides ached. The contrast to the dinner was stark. There, I'd been surrounded by people bound to me by blood but not by care. Their words, weapons meant to shrink me. Here, in this worn-out diner booth, I was with people who chose me, who laughed with me, who saw my scars, literal and not, and didn't flinch. I thought about the curling iron mark on my arm, hidden under my sleeve now, and how Maya had noticed it years ago, not dismissing it like my mother but asking gently what happened. I'd told her the truth, and she'd hugged me, no questions, no blame. Liam too had always been there, driving me to my first writing gig, reading my drafts, never letting me feel small. They were my anchors, my proof that family wasn't about shared DNA, but shared heart. As the night wore on, my phone kept buzzing. More comments, another text from Emma. Mom's trying to call everyone, saying you're lying, no one's buying it. I showed it to Maya and Liam, who exchanged a look. They're scrambling, Liam said, shaking his head. Good, let them. I smiled. A real one, not the tight mask I'd worn at the dinner. The article was doing its work, peeling back the layers of my family's hypocrisy. I didn't need to be there to see Olivia's panic or my mother's desperate phone calls. I was here, with people who mattered, and for the first time, I felt the weight of my family's rejection lift. Before we left, Maya pulled me into a hug, her arms tight around me. You're a badass, Courtney, she whispered. Don't ever forget it. Liam ruffled my hair, earning a playful shove, and we stepped out into the cool night, the diner's neon sign buzzing behind us. As I drove home, the stars bright above, I realized this was what I'd been fighting for. Not just to expose Olivia and my mother, but to find a place where I belonged. The dinner had been a battlefield, but this moment, with my chosen family, was my victory. The morning after the diner, I woke to sunlight streaming through my apartment window. A quiet calm settling over me despite the storm I'd unleashed. My phone was a battlefield of its own. Notifications piling up, texts from cousins, and a furious voicemail from Olivia that I deleted without listening to. The article had hit 100,000 views overnight, and the journalist I'd emailed was pushing for a follow-up interview. But as I sat on my couch, coffee mug in hand, I knew the real work wasn't in the public fallout. It was in building a fortress around my peace, setting boundaries to keep my family's toxicity out for good. Today I'd face the aftermath head-on, and I was determined to do it on my terms. I started with my phone, scrolling through the messages. Emma had texted again. Aunt Margaret's losing it. She's saying you betrayed the family. I stared at the words, my thumb hovering over the screen. Betrayed. The irony stung, years of their betrayal dismissing my pain, and now I was the villain. I typed back, she betrayed me first, I'm done. Short, final, no room for argument. Then I blocked her number, along with my mother's, Olivia's, and my father's. My hands shook as I did it, not from fear but from the weight of cutting those ties. It was like locking a door I'd left cracked open for too long, hoping they'd walk through and see me. They never did. Next, I opened my laptop and drafted an email to the extended family, cousins, aunts, uncles, who'd been at the dinner. I kept it simple, direct. You saw the truth last night. I'm not asking for your support, but I'm done pretending everything's fine. Don't contact me unless you're ready to acknowledge what happened. I attached a link to the article just in case they thought I was bluffing. My fingers lingered over the send button. A flicker of doubt creeping in. Would they think I was too harsh, too unforgiving? But then I remembered the dinner, Olivia's smirk, my mother's cold verdict, and I hit send. The whoosh of the email felt like a wall going up, solid and unyielding. I stood, pacing my small living room, the hardwood cool under my bare feet. My apartment was a sanctuary, bookshelves stuffed with novels, a desk cluttered with notebooks, a space I'd built without their approval. But their voices still lingered, like ghosts I needed to banish. I thought about the curling iron scar, how I'd hidden it for years, ashamed of the story it told. No more. I grabbed a marker and a piece of paper, writing down my new rules. No contact with Olivia or my parents, no family events unless I set the terms, no apologies for my truth. I taped it to my fridge, a reminder that my peace wasn't negotiable. My phone buzzed again, a call from the journalist Lisa. I answered, my voice steady as I agreed to meet her later that day. Your story's resonating with a lot of people, she said, her tone warm but professional. We want to amplify it. I thanked her, my mind already racing. The article was just the start. I could do more. Write a book, speak at events, help others share their stories. But first I needed to protect myself. I called Maya, who picked up on the first ring. "You good?" she asked, her voice a lifeline. I told her about blocking my family, the email, the rules on my fridge. She laughed, a bright, proud sound. "That's my girl," she said. "You're building a castle, not just a wall." Later at the coffee shop with Lisa, I laid out the aftermath. She scribbled notes as I described the dinner, the recordings, the years of collecting evidence. "You're not just exposing them," she said, looking up. "You're giving others permission to speak." Her words hit deep, echoing the comments on the article. I nodded, my hands wrapped around my coffee mug, the warmth seeping into my palms. "I just want people to know they don't have to stay silent," I said. She smiled, promising to run the story by the weekend. As we parted, I felt a shift, not just relief, but purpose. My boundaries weren't just about keeping them out, they were about making space for something bigger. Back home, I checked my phone one last time. A new email from my aunt, the one who'd once told me to stand up for myself. "I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. I believe you." I stared at it, my chest tight. It wasn't enough to erase years of silence, but it was a crack in their armor. I didn't reply, not yet. Instead, I added her to my mental list of maybe people I might let in later, on my terms. As I set my phone down, I looked at the rules on my fridge, the marker bold against the paper. This was my fortress, and I'd defend it with everything I had. The fallout was theirs to deal with. My job was to keep moving forward, free from their shadows. The morning light filtered through my apartment window, casting soft shadows across the notebook on my desk, its pages filled with the story I'd spent years telling myself I wasn't ready to share. The article's fallout was still rippling. My phone buzzed with notifications, emails from strangers thanking me, even a message from a local support group asking me to speak. But as I sat down, with a fresh cup of coffee, the weight of the dinner and my family's rejection felt distant, like a storm that had passed. Today, I wasn't just surviving their cruelty, I was reclaiming my name, my story, my legacy, and turning the pain they'd inflicted into something that could light the way for others. This was my chance to redefine what being a read meant, on my own terms. I opened my laptop, the screen glowing with a draft I'd started weeks ago, before the dinner, before the article went viral. It was the outline of a memoir, a fuller version of my story, not just the abuse, but the strength I'd found in fighting back. I'd hesitated to write it, afraid it was too raw, too exposing. But now, with the truth out and my boundaries set, I felt ready. My fingers moved across the keyboard, the words flowing easily. I wrote about the curling iron, the scar still faint on my arm, and how my mother's dismissal had hurt more than the burn. I wrote about the box under my bed, the years of collecting evidence, the way it had felt like building a shield. Each sentence was a brick in a new foundation, one that didn't rely on my family's approval. As I wrote, I thought about the impact I wanted to have. The article had already reached thousands, but I could do more. I paused to check my email, finding a message from Lisa, the journalist. Her story had run, front page of the local paper, with a headline that hit hard. "Local woman exposes family abuse, sparks conversation." She'd included quotes from my interview, alongside comments from readers who'd reached out. One was from a woman named Rachel. "Courtney's story gave me the courage to leave my toxic family." My chest tightened, not with pain but with purpose. I wasn't just telling my story, I was helping others find their voices. I replied to Lisa, agreeing to a follow-up piece, and added, "I want to start a platform for survivors. Can we talk about that?" She responded almost instantly. "Absolutely, let's make it happen." I stood, stretching my arms, and walked to the window. The city stretched out below, alive with possibility. I thought about my family's name, Reed, how it had always been tied to Olivia's achievements, my mother's charity work, their carefully curated image. Now I was redefining it. I opened a new document and sketched out ideas for the platform, a website where survivors could share their stories anonymously, resources for support, even workshops I could lead based on my writing experience. I'd fund it with my freelance earnings, maybe crowdfund the rest. The thought of turning my pain into something tangible, something that helped others, felt like a victory bigger than any revenge. My phone buzzed. A text from Maya. "Saw the article in the paper, you're a legend." I smiled, texting back a heart emoji. Maya and Liam had been my anchors, and I wanted them involved in this too. I called Liam, catching him on his lunch break. I'm starting something, I said, my voice steady with excitement. A platform for people like me, who've been silenced. You in? He laughed, the sound warm. You kidding? I'm already designing the logo in my head. We talked for an hour, brainstorming names, features, ways to reach people who felt alone. It wasn't just a project, it was a legacy, one I was building without my family's shadow. Later, I walked to the park near my apartment, a notebook tucked under my arm. I sat on a bench watching kids play on the swings, their laughter a reminder of the childhood I'd fought to survive. I jotted down more ideas, a podcast series maybe, or a blog where I'd post weekly, sharing not just my story but others. I thought about my aunt's email from yesterday, her apology for staying silent. I'd reply eventually, but not now. This moment was about me, about the future I was creating. The Reed name would no longer mean Olivia's trophies or my mother's fake smiles. It would mean resilience, truth, a beacon for those still finding their way. As the sun dipped lower, I closed my notebook, my fingers brushing the scar on my arm. It wasn't a mark of shame anymore. It was a badge of what I'd overcome. I'd taken the pain they'd given me and turned it into something powerful, something that would outlast their lies. My family had tried to erase me, but I was writing my own story now, one that would echo far beyond their dining room table. The park bench was cool beneath me as I sat with my notebook closed, the weight of the past few weeks settling into a quiet clarity. The scar on my arm, faintly visible in the late afternoon light, no longer felt like a wound. It was a map of where I'd been and where I'd arrived. My phone sat silent in my pocket, the notifications from the article and the journalist's follow-up story no longer pulling at me. I'd spent years chasing my family's approval, then years planning their downfall. But now, as the breeze rustled the trees, I realized the real victory wasn't in their ruin. It was in finding peace within myself. This moment, alone with my thoughts, was where I'd finally validate my own worth. I leaned back, my eyes tracing the clouds drifting above. The dinner, the recordings, the article, they'd all been steps toward this. A shedding of the need to prove myself to people who'd never cared to see me. I thought about the girl I'd been at 12, clutching a washcloth to a curling iron burn, believing I deserved it because my mother said so. That girl had carried a box of evidence, a shield against their dismissal, but she'd also carried shame, a quiet fear that she wasn't enough. Now at 26, I saw her differently. She wasn't weak. She'd been strong enough to survive, to keep going, to build a life despite their efforts to erase her. I forgave her for the years she spent trying to fit their mold, and in doing so, I forgave myself. My mind drifted to the platform I was planning. The ideas I'd jotted down, workshops, a website, a podcast, felt like more than a project. They were a promise to that younger self, a way to ensure others didn't have to carry their pain alone. I imagined speaking to a room of people like Rachel, the woman who'd commented on the article, telling them they could reclaim their stories too. The thought made my chest expand, not with anger or triumph, but with purpose. My family had tried to define my worth by their standards. Olivia's trophies, my mother's image, my father's silence. But I'd found my own measure. It wasn't in their approval or their downfall. It was in the life I was building, the people I was helping, the truth I was living. I stood, tucking my notebook under my arm, and walked toward the park's edge, where the city hummed in the distance. My apartment, my friends, my work, they were my world now, not the polished dining room I'd left behind. I thought about Maya's hug in the diner, Liam's laugh, the way they'd celebrated my courage, without needing me to prove it. They were my family not because of blood, but because of choice. And the strangers who'd reached out, Rachel, the commenters, the support group, they were part of that family too, connected by shared resilience. I didn't need the Reeds anymore. I was enough. As I reached my car, my phone buzzed one last time. It was an email from Lisa, confirming the follow-up story would run tomorrow, with a quote from me. My story isn't about revenge, it's about truth. I smiled, locking my phone without replying. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, and I felt a stillness I hadn't known was possible. The box under my bed, the evidence, the article, they'd been tools to break free, but this peace, this certainty, was the real destination. I'd spent years fighting to be seen, but now, I saw myself. And that was enough. Have you ever felt invisible, like your voice didn't matter? That's where I was, trapped in a family that dismissed me. But I found my way out by telling my truth. If my journey resonates with you, share your story in the comments. I want to hear how you've reclaimed your voice. Please like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to know it's okay to define their own worth. You don't need anyone's permission to be enough. Your strength, your truth, your story, they're already enough. Keep shining because you're not alone.